morning, church. It's Pastor Mike. This morning, in our devotion, I wanted to share with you Psalm 89. It's one of the texts for this week of Advent coming up. And it tells us a beautiful story, this beautiful dialogue between the psalmist and God, holding on to the truth of God's promise, and not just the truth of it, but the certainty of it, the firmness of God's truth. The psalmist begins in Psalm 89 by saying that God's steadfast love is established forever, and his faithfulness is as firm as the heavens themselves. In short, that God's promise isn't going anywhere. That no matter what happens, God has said, I love you, I am here for you, and nothing will happen outside of that truth. We can be tempted to believe that that doesn't matter or it's not as relevant based on the things that are going on in our world, based on seeing hurt and pain and discord and division. And we can say, where is God in the midst of all of this? And the psalm continues with the psalmist giving the reasons for his assurance in God's promise, holding on to the fact that God has victory over chaos in creation, that God's strength and God's cosmic victory over all the forces has made creation possible, and the creation of his people possible, and the creation of our entire world possible. And on the strength of every one of those declarations, that all of the earth and every being in heaven look to God for their being and their purpose and who they are, the psalmist says, I know that God's word is true, because everything points to his power and to his glory. And so the psalmist continues, looking forward to the kingdom of David, which will be established forever. And he says that he will set his hand on the sea and his right hand on the rivers, this one coming king in the line of David, which we know to be Jesus. And that king shall cry back to God, you are my Father, my God, and the rock of my salvation. Because that's the only proper response to what God has done for us and is doing. As God continues to be faithful, loving, and kind, our response is to recognize just who he is and what he's done. So my prayer for you today is that you would acknowledge God as the rock of your salvation. And the storms of this world will rage and they will beat against that rock. But I promise you that when we set ourselves on it, we will not be shaken no matter how hard the storms rage. We will be secure because God's love and his faithfulness are as firm as the heavens. So God bless you today, and may this day be a day where your faith is strengthened in the power and in the promise of God's word.